Queenpin, Story of Ice. The Queenpin, Episode 1. The Icebreaker.
The rain came down like God was fed up, the skies opening up and pouring out a relentless sheet of water that soaked North Park to its core. The city didn't flinch though. It never did. Streets buzzed with the type of energy only desperation could produce. In the dim glow of flickering streetlights, dice games popped off on corners, hustlers moved weight like clockwork, and Malik's boys lurked like wolves, waiting for any scent of weakness. But weakness wasn't in Jade Ice Daniels' DNA. She stood on the corner of 3rd and Anaconda like she owned the block because, truth be told, she really liked that. Her jet black leather jacket clung to her like armor, the rain slicking her braids as she scoped the street. Ice had the kind of aura that made people pause mid-conversation when she walked by. She wasn't loud about her power. It was the kind of quiet that made you uneasy, the calm before a storm.
Yo, Ice.
Lenny's voice cut through the rain as he jogged up, his scuffed Jordans splashing in the puddles. The kid was jittery, too eager to prove himself. Jade clocked the nervous energy from a mile away but didn't turn to him right away. She kept her eyes on the shadows, scanning like a hawk for movement. "What's good?" she asked finally, her voice low and steady like the bass line in a trap beat. Lenny bent over, catching his breath. "Shipments en route, but Malik's boys been sniffing around."
Fasho is, they plannin' to hit the drop. Ice's jaw didn't tighten.
Her eyes didn't narrow. She didn't do that. Her reactions were always internal, calculated. Malik the Tyrant was sloppy, predictable. His crew operated on brute force and intimidation, while hers moved like ghosts, silent, strategic, and deadly when necessary. "Let 'em try," she said coolly, the faintest hint of a smirk pulling at her lips.
"They'll wish they hadn't."
Across town, in a cramped, smoke-filled office that smelled like spilled honey and old regrets, Malik leaned over a map of North Park. His gold chains clinked as he jabbed his fat finger at a circled spot. His voice was a low growl, every syllable dripping with rage.
"She thinks she's slick, runnin' this game like it's hers," he spat.
"But tonight,
we taken back control."
Tito, Malik's right-hand man, nodded from the corner. He was a mountain of a dude, built like a freight train, but even he couldn't hide the unease in his eyes. He'd seen Ice in action. Her moves were like chess 3 steps ahead before anyone else even knew they were in the game. "She ain't bulletproof," Malik barked, as if trying to convince himself.
"We roll up, take that shipment, and send her a message she'll never forget." Tito nodded again but stayed quiet.
In his gut, he knew this wasn't gonna go the way Malik thought.
Back on 3rd and Anaconda.
The rain eased up, but the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Ice paced slowly, her boots tapping a rhythm on the slick pavement. The sleek black SUV pulled up, its tinted windows reflecting the dim streetlights. The door swung open, and Dre stepped out, his imposing frame cutting through the scene like a blade. Dre was Ice's muscle, her enforcer. His presence alone was enough to send most people running. "Drops clean," Dre said, his voice a low rumble.
"Ain't nobody out there," but Ice wasn't convinced.
She had that itch, that gut feeling that something was off. "They out there," she muttered, scanning the alleyways.
"Malik's boys don't move subtle. They move dumb."
As if on cue, shadows shifted across the street. Figures stepped out, their weapons glinting under the dim lights. Malik's crew had rolled deep, at least a dozen of them, and they moved like they thought they were invincible. From above, perched on the rooftop of a rundown apartment building, Ghost watched through the scope of his rifle. He was Ice's eyes in the sky, a sniper with the patience of a monk and the aim of a god.
"Got 'em," Ghost's voice crackled through the earpiece in Ice's ear. 12 o'clock, all strapped.
"What's the play?" Ice smirked, the kind of grin that could unnerve the devil himself. She stepped forward, the rain tapping on her hood like applause.
"Yo, y'all lost?"
she called out, her voice slicing through the silence like a blade. The leader of the group, a skinny dude with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward.
"This our block now, Ice," he sneered.
Malik said he didn't get to finish the sentence. A single shot rang out, and the ground in front of his foot exploded in a shower of sparks. Ghost didn't miss, and Ice didn't bluff. Malik don't own nothing out here, Ice said, her tone cold enough to freeze the air. You come at me again, and my guy up there ain't gonna aim for the pavement next time. The tension was suffocating. The crew hesitated, their bravado evaporating in the face of Ice's unshakable confidence. Fall back, the scarred man barked, reluctantly signaling his crew to retreat. As they slinked into the shadows, Ice turned to Dre. Get the drop moved, double time, and tell Ghost to keep his eyes open. This ain't over. A new player. Unbeknownst to Jade, a figure lingered in the distance, leaning against a lamppost with an air of calculated indifference. Amelia Carter had been hired to observe the brewing war between Jade and Malik, but as she watched Ice command the scene, her sharp blue eyes caught more than just a queenpin at work. There was a magnetism to Jade, a pull Red couldn't ignore. For a moment, their eyes met across the street. It was brief, but it carried weight. Jade didn't flinch, didn't react. She simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement, before disappearing into the night. And just like that, the queenpin was gone, leaving Red with a smirk and a curious thought. This city ain't big enough for two legends, but maybe there's room for a partnership. To be continued. Queenpin, Story of Ice, Episode 2 Frostbite. The rain had stopped, but the streets of North Park stayed slick and restless. Clouds hung low in the sky, blanketing the city in a gray haze that felt heavier than the air itself. Life moved on the edge here, every glance over the shoulder carrying a weight of suspicion. And yet, for Jade Ice Daniels, this was home, chaos and all. Ice sat in the corner booth of Hustle and Grind, a rundown calf with peeling wallpaper and a perpetually flickering neon sign. It wasn't her usual spot, but that was intentional. Sometimes you had to break your patterns to stay ahead of the game. She stirred her coffee absently, her mind already 3 steps ahead. She wasn't here for the weak brew, she was here for intel. The door chimed, and in walked Eli Carter. He had the kind of presence that made heads turn. Broad shoulders, deep brown skin, and a smirk that could melt through Ice's demeanor if she let it. He wore a crisp black hoodie under a bomber jacket, a symbol of his ability to blend street savvy with style. Eli was known around North Park as a fixer, the guy who could get you out of a jam for the right price. He slid into the booth across from Ice without waiting for an invitation, his dark eyes scanning her face for any sign of what this meeting was about. Ice didn't look up right away. She let the silence linger, sipping her coffee as if he weren't even there. Finally, she spoke. "You're late." Her voice was calm, controlled. Eli chuckled, leaning back in the booth. "Nah, you're early. Difference in perspective, Ice." Ice raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. She appreciated his confidence, but this wasn't a game. She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Eli picked it up, unfolded it, and studied the scrawled address and time written on it. "This Malik's spot?" he asked. Ice nodded. "He's doubling down. Got a shipment coming in tonight. If he thinks he can move weight through my streets without my blessing, he's dumber than I thought." Eli's smirk faded. "And what's my role in all this?" "I need eyes and ears inside," Ice said, her tone matter of fact. "You've got connections. Make a few calls, figure out his moves before he makes them." "And Eli?" "Yeah?" Her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made him sit up straighter. "If you're not all in, walk away now. I don't do halfway." Eli leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "I'm in, but let me make something clear, I don't work for anyone. This is a partnership." Ice's lips curved into a faint smile. "Fair enough. Just don't make me regret it." Malik's trap. Malik sat in the back of a dimly lit nightclub, his gold chains catching the light from a flickering chandelier above. The bass from the music on the dance floor shook the walls, but Malik's focus was elsewhere. He had his crew around him, including Tito, who stood by the door like a human fortress. On the table in front of Malik was a map of North Park, marked up with circles and arrows. This is how we take her down, Malik said, tapping the map with a fat finger.
She thinks she's untouchable, but tonight, we're gonna show her who runs this city.
Tito shifted uncomfortably.
You sure about this, Malik? Ice don't play fair.
Malik shot him a glare. You scared of her?
You wanna bow down to some chick who thinks she's smarter than all of us? Ain't bout being scared, Tito said. It's bout being smart. She's always got something up her sleeve.
Malik's face darkened.
Then it's time to show her what happens when you underestimate me. I'm done playing nice.
The setup. The address Ice had given Eli led to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of North Park. The place was quiet, almost too quiet, as Eli scoped it out from the shadows. He'd called in a favor and learned that Malik planned to move his shipment through here around midnight. But there was something off. The lack of security, the empty streets, it didn't add up. Eli pulled out his phone and sent Ice a text. Feels like a trap. Proceed with caution. On the other side of town, Ice read the message and smirked. She liked that Eli wasn't afraid to speak up, but she also trusted her instincts. If Malik wanted a fight, she'd bring it to his doorstep. She nodded to Dre, who sat next to her in the black SUV idling in an alley.
Time to move.
Ghost in position? Dre nodded. Always. Ice's crew rolled up to the warehouse in 3 cars, moving with precision and purpose. They surrounded the building, weapons ready, as Ghost's voice crackled through the comms.
Got movement on the east side. Looks like Malik's crew.
Ice stepped out of the SUV, her braids pulled back into a tight ponytail, her leather jacket glinting under the streetlights. She signaled to her team to hold their positions as she moved toward the building. Inside, Malik's crew waited, guns drawn and nerves frayed. Tito stood near the entrance, his massive frame blocking the door. Malik paced back and forth, a smug grin on his face.
She's walking right into it, Malik said. When she steps through that door, we light her up.
But Ice wasn't about to make it that easy. As she approached the entrance, she pulled out a small device and pressed a button. The warehouse lights flickered and went out, plunging the building into darkness. Ghost's voice came through the comms.
Lights out. They're blind, Ice smiled.
Move in. Her crew swept into the building like shadows, taking out Malik's men with precision and speed. Dre's massive frame was a blur of motion, disarming 2 of Malik's men before they could react. Eli appeared out of nowhere, his movements smooth and calculated as he took down another. Malik, caught off guard, scrambled for cover, but Ice found him first. She stepped out of the shadows, her gun trained on him, her expression ice cold. Game over, Malik, she said. Malik raised his hands, his bravado evaporating.
8, Ice. You made your point. This your city.
Ice smirked.
Glad you finally understand. Now get out of my sight.
As Malik and his battered crew retreated, Ice turned to Eli, who was watching her with a mix of admiration and curiosity. You good? She asked. Eli nodded, a small smile playing on his lips.
Better than good.
You got moves, Queenpin. Ice chuckled softly.
Stick around, Eli. You ain't seen nothing yet.
As the crew packed up and the night began to settle, Ice and Eli lingered outside the warehouse. The tension between them was electric, unspoken but undeniable. For the first time in a long time, Ice felt something she hadn't expected, a spark, but she pushed it aside. There was no room for distractions in her world, not yet anyway. Eli leaned against the wall, watching her.
You ever take a break, Jade?
She glanced at him, her expression softening just slightly.
Not when there's work to do.
He nodded, but his eyes lingered on hers.
Well, if you ever need someone to remind you how to breathe, you know where to find me.
Ice didn't respond, but the faintest smile touched her lips as she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows like the queenpin she was. To be continued.
Queenpin, Story of Ice, Episode 3, Love in the Crossfire.
The air was thick with tension as night descended over North Park. The neon lights flickered against the cracked windows of Club Mirage, a notorious meeting spot where loyalty and betrayal danced on a razor's edge. Inside, The pulsing bass of a trap beat reverberated through the room, drowning out murmured conversations and deals whispered under the cover of darkness. Jade Ice Daniels sat in a shadowy corner booth, her blonde and red locks shimmering under the moody glow of the club's LED lights. She wore a leather jacket over a fitted black dress, exuding her usual blend of authority and allure. Across from her sat Eli, his clean-cut appearance and calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos swirling around them. But there was an unspoken energy between them, one that both acknowledged silently yet refused to act upon openly. Eli leaned forward, his deep voice cutting through the haze of music.
You sure about this meetup, Ice?
Word on the street is Malik's been moving different. Jade smirked, swirling the ice in her glass.
Malik's always moving. He just hasn't figured out I'm the one pulling the strings.
Eli chuckled, but his eyes lingered on her a second too long before he spoke again. Still, I'd rather be overprepared than caught lacking.
You've got too much to lose.
Her smirk faltered slightly at the sincerity in his tone, but she covered it well, meeting his gaze with a sharpness that could slice through steel.
I always have a plan, Eli.
Trust. The moment stretched, tension crackling like electricity between them. Before either could say more, Dre appeared at the edge of their booth, his towering frame blocking the club's flickering lights. Ice, Dre said, his voice low but urgent.
Malik's people outside.
They're not here to talk. Jade's smirk vanished. She slid out of the booth, motioning for Eli to follow.
Let's see what Malik's playing at. Outside Club Mirage.
The rain had started again, tapping against the asphalt like an impatient metronome. Jade stepped into the alley behind the club, Eli and Dre flanking her. In the dim light, a group of Malik's men loomed at the far end, their silhouettes distorted by the haze of rain and steam rising from a nearby sewer grate. Jade's voice sliced through the night.
If Malik's got something to say, he can say it to my face. One of the men stepped forward, his face partially obscured by a hood. He held up a small package wrapped in brown paper.
Malik says this is a peace offering, the man said, his tone dripping with mockery.
But we both know he's got other plans. Dre took a step forward, but Jade raised a hand to stop him.
What's in it? The man shrugged.
Open it and find out.
Eli's hand instinctively moved toward his waistband, ready to draw, but Jade took the package herself.
She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a single playing card, the Queen of Spades.
Written across it in red ink were the words, "You're already losing." Jade's jaw tightened. She crumpled the card in her fist, her mind racing. The message was clear. Malik was making his next move. The escape. Suddenly, headlights flooded the alley, blinding them. Tires screeched as two black SUVs barreled in, cutting off their exit. Malik's men closed in, weapons drawn. Move, Jade barked, pulling Eli by the arm as Dre unleashed a barrage of gunfire. The three darted through a side passage, bullets ricocheting off the walls around them. The rain made the ground slick, and Eli nearly lost his footing, but Jade's grip steadied him, an intimate moment that passed unspoken but not unnoticed. They emerged onto the main street, where Ghost was waiting with the whip. "Get in," Ghost shouted, his sniper rifle still slung over his shoulder. They piled into the car, Dre firing a few more shots to cover their retreat before jumping into the passenger seat. The car sped off, leaving Malik's crew scrambling in the distance. Safe house confessions. The hideout was a converted loft in an abandoned warehouse. The air smelled of damp concrete and motor oil, a stark contrast to the warmth of Club Mirage. Ghost locked the door behind them, his rifle still slung across his back. Jade leaned against a steel support beam, arms crossed, her face calm but eyes flickering with thought. Dre was pacing, muttering to himself about the boldness of Malik's crew. Ghost silently set up surveillance on the loft's makeshift monitors. Eli, as always, observed. His demeanor was steady, his gaze unreadable. There was something about him that made Jade feel both unnerved and anchored.
"You all right?"
he asked softly, keeping his voice low enough that only she could hear. Jade's head tilted, her expression unreadable.
"You keep asking that. What are you really trying to say, Eli?"
He stepped closer, his movements deliberate but measured.
You don't have to do this alone, Ice.
Whatever this is, you don't have to carry it all. She looked up at him, her walls wavering ever so slightly, but the vulnerability in her eyes was fleeting, replaced by her signature edge. I've carried worse, she replied, her voice soft but firm. And I've survived. Before Eli could press further, Dre's sharp voice cut through the moment.
Yo, we've got company again.
Surveillance and surprise. Ghost monitors showed a single figure lurking just outside the warehouse, their movements calculated. Jade stepped closer to the screen. The figure wore a trench coat, their face hidden under a hood. Ghost's fingers flew across the keyboard, enhancing the feed. That's not Malik's crew. Jade narrowed her eyes, recognizing the body language. She grabbed a headset and mic from the table. Everyone, stay ready. The figure approached the door, and with a swift kick, it flew open. Standing in the doorway was a tall woman with fiery red hair, holding a suppressed pistol. Amelia Carter stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room with a smirk.
Well, Ice, looks like we finally meet face to face.
Eli instinctively stepped in front of Jade, but she waved him off. Red, Jade said, her tone icy.
What do you want?
Red's smirk widened as she holstered her weapon.
Relax, I'm not here to kill you.
Yet, Dre growled, hand twitching toward his gun. Ghost moved silently into the shadows, rifle at the ready. Red tilted her head, amused.
I've got a proposition, Ice, but it's not one you'll like. Jade raised an eyebrow.
Try me. Red leaned against the doorframe, her eyes flashing with mischief.
Malik's not your biggest problem anymore. He's just a piece of the puzzle, and I hold the missing pieces. Jade's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. A text from an unknown number read, "Play nice. Red's your only shot." She looked up, her jaw tightening. All right, Red, let's talk. But if you're lying, I'll bury you myself.
Red grinned.
That's the spirit.
To be continued.